In the headlines, President Park Geun-hye vows efforts to make inter-Korean unification a reality in her New Year's address. Also kicking off a brand new year, Korea's finance minister urges policymakers to help implement sweeping reforms for the country's sustainable growth. And Chinese President Xi Jinping orders a probe into a stampede that killed dozens in Shanghai on New Year's Eve. Hello and welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us on the very first working day of 2015. Coming to you live from Seoul, I am Kang Tae-ri. President Park Geun-hye hosted a New Year's ceremony at her office this Friday for some 200 officials as well as politicians. She did not exactly give a direct answer to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's apparent offer for summit talks in the new year, but she did stress the importance of paving the path for unification. Song Ji-sun has more.
Reunification is no longer a dream, and preparations are needed to make sure it becomes reality. In a New Year's greeting ceremony at Cheongwade on Friday, President Park Geun-hye pledged realistic plans toward realizing reunification of the two Koreas. Although she did not clearly state a response to North Korea's willingness to hold an inter-Korean summit, Park said that it is the current generation's duty to hand over a united Korea to the next, and practical measures are the only means to realizing it. President Park, in her New Year's address on the last day of 2014, expressed a determination to improve Seoul's relations with the North this year. Domestically, the president pledged reforms, saying that 2015 should be a year of national innovation. Park stressed that outdated customs and systems must be replaced across all sectors, not just with regard to the economy. President Park also noted that Seoul will work toward topping a GDP per capita income of $30,000 this year and toward extending that figure to $40,000 per person in the near future through the government's 3-year economic reform plan. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
Before hosting that New Year's gathering, President Park spoke on the phone with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. During their phone conversation, she asked for the UN chief's support for improving the fundamentals of inter-Korean ties and the human rights situation in North Korea. Secretary General Ban, for his part, promised efforts for better inter-Korean relations. He also praised President Park's leadership on the international stage last year, while adding that he wishes to see her take on a greater diplomatic role at the upcoming 70th UN General Assembly session, as well as at a special summit on the so-called post-2015 development agenda. North Korea watchers say both at home and abroad actually are keeping their eyes on their New Year exchanges between Seoul and Pyongyang. The most attention is being directed to whether the leaders of South Korea and North Korea will be able to sit down face-to-face in 2015. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Under the right mood and conditions, there is no reason for us to hold back from the highest level talks. We will put our utmost efforts for practical progress in dialogue and negotiations.
The South Korean government hopes to hold any form of inter-Korean talks in the near future.
The two Koreas kicked off the new year by expressing their willingness for inter-Korean dialogue. But what's the chance of them getting back to the negotiating table? Kim Jong-un's apparent summit offer is his first since he took power in 2011, but it comes with strings attached. Seoul must halt its annual military exercises with Washington. North Korea has always protested the drills, which take place between February and March. South Korea says it has no plans to cancel the exercises this year. Kim also stressed Pyongyang will not give up its nuclear program, pledging to stick to the so-called Pyeongjin policy, or the dual development of nuclear arms and the economy. Still, analysts say the North Korean leader has shown a strong determination to talk with the South, and they expect the regime to propose various forms of dialogue. This as Kim seeks to end Pyongyang's diplomatic isolation by reaching a breakthrough with Seoul. President Park will also want to make some progress with the North in her third year in office. But analysts say South Korea must first test North Korea's sincerity before jumping back into talks. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
While the U.S. government says it supports better inter-Korean ties, there's skepticism among American experts over Kim Jong-un's possible summit offer. They are telling policymakers in Seoul as well as in Washington to take the young leader's words with a grain of salt. Kim Jong-un tells us more.
U.S. experts have cautioned against getting too carried away with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's New Year's address, in which he called for a major shift in inter-Korean ties. They question his sincerity as Kim made clear that Pyongyang has no intention of backing away from its nuclear ambitions. U.S. pundits say that Seoul and Washington will only come back to the negotiating table if North Korea shows a willingness to denuclearize. The Brookings Institution, a conservative U.S. think tank, says Seoul and Washington should be cautious when yielding to any new demands or when trying to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table, as it could entail excessive costs. The Center for Strategic and International Studies says it's too early to evaluate Pyongyang's stance and that South Korea should wait for possible talks with the North in January. Some U.S. experts say Pyongyang is trying to deflect the international community's concerns about its human rights problems by issuing conciliatory gestures to South Korea. Diplomatic sources in Washington say a willingness from North Korea to dismantle its nuclear program must come before talks, but added the recent Sony Pictures hacking will negatively affect the issue. Kim Jong-un, ARIRANG News.
One of the preconditions for inter-Korean summit talks that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has come out with is that South Korea and the U.S. cancel their joint military exercises, but South Korea's defense ministry says it's not happening and that exercises set for this March will go ahead as planned. The ministry says that since the two Koreas are technically still at war, Seoul needs to continue training to enhance its military readiness. An armistice agreement was signed at the end of the Korean War in 1953, leaving the two Koreas in a ceasefire. Two of North Korea's most powerful families have reportedly strengthened their bond through marriage. Local reports citing unnamed sources say North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, married Choi Ryong-hae's second son last year. Choi is considered the second most powerful man in the North Korean regime. North Korean state media released a photo of Kim Yo-jong on this Friday, showing with what appears to be a wedding ring on her left hand. A member of the Korean medical team currently in Sierra Leone to help treat Ebola victims may have been exposed to the virus. Korea's foreign ministry says the unnamed person had direct contact with a needle that was used on an Ebola patient. Now, the head of Korea's Disease Control Center described how it happened. Have a listen.
The index finger part of the medical worker's three-layer glove ripped while drawing blood from an Ebola patient at a treatment center near Freetown. The medical worker made contact with the needle, but shows no sign of injury or symptoms of the Ebola virus.
The medical worker will be sent to a hospital in Germany on Saturday and will be placed in isolation for 21 days for observation. This development comes after a Korean team of 4 doctors and 6 nurses were sent to Sierra Leone last month. The #1 priority for Korean Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan this year will be pushing for structural reforms. He says without those changes, the Korean economy might face disastrous consequences. Park Geun-hye has more.
Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan has pledged to do his best to push through structural reforms that he says are not only critical for the Korean economy, but inevitable. In his New Year's address, he said Korea would fail to create more jobs and provide more welfare benefits without the reforms. He added the government will not ignore the fact that younger, unemployed people believe they're not needed, that 1 out of every 3 employees is a temporary worker, and that retired baby boomers are rushing to open small businesses in sectors that are already highly competitive. Ches said the problems stem from structural issues in the economy like an inflexible labor market, an imbalance between exports and domestic demand, a shrinking workforce due to the aging population and low birth rates, and the decreased competitiveness of major manufacturers. Che also said the Korean economy could also struggle just as the Eurozone and Japanese economies have if the government fails to meet its reform goals. In his overall evaluation of last year, the finance minister said the domestic economy managed to lay the foundation for structural reforms through aggressive expansionary policies. He added that Korea also received better sovereign ratings than Japan while expanding its free trade reach into countries like China. Hwang Ji, ARIRANG News.
Hyundai and Kia Motors have set their global sales target for the new year at 8.2 million cars, which would represent the weakest pace of sales growth since 2003. Group Chairman Chung Mong-gu in his New Year's speech said the company will raise its brand awareness overseas in 2015 by producing quality green cars and increasing the localization of its products. Analysts point to unfavorable currency conditions, namely the strong won against the weak Japanese yen and the slow global recovery, as prominent risks for this group. Now, speaking of cars, and Hyundai Motors plan to go green this year, global brands are gearing up to roll out new models in step with global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions this year. And our Son Jung-in tells us what we can expect.
A brand new lineup of eco-friendly cars will be released in 2015. Hyundai Motor, which just recently unveiled a new Sonata hybrid, is expected to launch a plug-in hybrid version, as will BMW, Porsche, and Audi. The Korean automaker is also launching a new compact hybrid-only brand for the first time in the country, hoping to compete with Toyota and Honda, which are currently the only 2 companies in the world that sell hybrid-only models.
The year 2015 marks an important start for the domestic green car market to expand.
The competition in the compact SUV market is also forecast to be fierce. SsangYong Motor will launch its Tivoli next year, pitting it against General Motors' Chevy Trax and Renault Samsung Motors' QM3 crossovers. Steady-selling models won't be far behind. Hyundai's Avante, which has sold over 10 million units worldwide, and Kia's Optima K5 will roll out new models in 2015. Meanwhile, in the luxury car market, the new full-size sedan Aslan and K9 Quantum will go head-to-head against each other, among others. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
Now, it's a good year for non-smokers in Korea, 2015 that is. The Korean government has hiked cigarette prices starting this new year and expanded no-smoking zones, hoping to bring down the smoking rate in this country. Our Kwon So-won went out to the streets today to see how our smokers are doing this new year.
Where there was once a variety of cigarette brands of different styles and flavors, the shelves at many convenience stores stand stripped bare. This, as smokers were busy grabbing as many cigarette packs as they could before the price nearly doubled on New Year's Day. This scramble shows that many smokers in Korea are not planning on kicking the habit, as is the government's plan. While some question whether the newly inflated prices will have a long-term effect on habitual smokers,
It's hard to quit. I think I will continue to smoke.
many researchers believe the policy will encourage people to stop out smoking.
Scientific evidence shows that the cigarette price raises about 10% would reduce tobacco consumption by about 4% in developed countries. We believe this will equally happen in Korea. And also the government implemented other tobacco control policies, so this will also help reduce tobacco consumption.
Those other policies are to do with where smokers can light up. Smoking is now banned in all restaurants regardless of their size. In cafes, chairs and tables have disappeared from smoking areas, meaning customers will be allowed to smoke in a designated zone, but they will not be allowed to eat or drink while doing so.
Smokers say they pay their taxes and the high cigarette prices and that this is too much. Some just leave without buying a coffee.
Even though they do not contain tobacco and are usually odorless, electronic cigarettes are also subject to the ban. The new policies came into effect on January 1st, but there will be a grace period of 3 months, giving smokers and businesses time to adapt. For smokers, they'll be left with a simple choice: put up with the new strict rules or stop smoking once and for all. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
International teams have recovered more bodies from the ill-fated AirAsia passenger jet. This as they continue to narrow the search zone for this plane in the Java Sea. And Paul Lee is joining us from the news center to tell us more. There was information earlier, Paul, about some of the first victims being identified, and now we have reports on additional remains being found. Give us the latest on this recovery operation.
Well, it's been confirmed that a total of 16 bodies have been pulled from the waters off the coast of Borneo. However, other reports in just the last hour suggest that number may be as high as 22. Indonesia's head of search and rescue says dozens of vessels have joined the search operation to find the plane's main hull and, of course, the black box recorders. This as a U.S. Navy helicopter from the USS Samson destroyer was able to bring more bodies back to shore on this Friday for identification. Later at a formal ceremony, Indonesian authorities handed over the remains of 3 of the AirAsia crash victims back to their families. Meanwhile, other relatives and friends are still desperately awaiting any information about their loved ones.
We have been here since the first day, taking care of the families to see if we can offer any help. We try to comfort them mentally so that they could cry out as a relief, and we accompany them all day long so that they won't feel alone.
It's still unclear what brought down the jetliner that was carrying 162 people on board while flying from Surabaya to Singapore on Sunday. Citing investigators, Reuters reports the pilot may have climbed too steeply above the clouds while trying to avoid a storm.
And let's turn to China this time. The country's top leader, Xi Jinping, has ordered a probe, an investigation into the deadly stampede that claimed nearly 40 lives on New Year's Eve in Shanghai. This innocent celebration to ring in the new year quickly spiraled out of control. Are authorities any closer to finding out how this happened?
Well, the exact cause has not been identified so far, but local police are refuting earlier reports that the chaos erupted when some fake money was thrown into the air from a nearby nightclub. Our Kim Jong-un tells us more.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has ordered a probe into a stampede that killed dozens in Shanghai on New Year's Eve. The incident happened about 25 minutes before midnight in the city's Bund district, where thousands of people had gathered to count down to the new year. At least 36 people, many of them students, were killed and dozens more were injured. President Xi has called for all-out efforts to attend to those affected while ordering local governments around the country to make sure such accidents do not happen again. The investigation will likely focus on whether there were enough police officers to control the huge crowds. Chinese media reports that nearly 300,000 turned up in Shanghai for celebrations last year. The injured, many of which have been hospitalized, recalled the accident.
I was hanging around the Bund district when it happened. I remember standing on a step and then passing out all of a sudden. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground.
There was a woman next to me who had been helping me all the way. She told me not to fall down. I guess I would have died if I had fallen down.
Shanghai police denied social media reports that the stampede was triggered by people trying to pick up fake cash dropped from the balcony of a nearby nightclub. Police say the bills were thrown after the stampede took place. Kim Jong-hye, ARIRANG News.
And finally, shifting to South America, that is, Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff has been sworn in for her second term in office. This comes after she was narrowly re-elected in October. What does the future hold for her as Brazil's first female head of state?
Well, she definitely has her work cut out for her. President Rousseff has vowed to pull Latin America's largest economy out of a 4-year slump, while at the same time slash government spending to curb rising inflation. The incumbent leader took the oath of office for her next 4-year term before Congress on New Year's Day. Thousands of her supporters, foreign dignitaries, and representatives from 130 countries attended the ceremony in the capital, Brasilia.
I was re-elected to continue transforming Brazil and to continue making the changes that you all desire. I promise I will make these changes. I begin my second mandate with greater hope. I take on this mandate with the certainty that we are united with dignity. We are united on our feet with the strength of the faith held by the Brazilian people.
The 67-year-old left-wing leader faces numerous challenges ahead. She's also dealing with a growing corruption scandal linking her own Workers' Party to a $1 billion kickback scheme from the state-run oil company.
And finally, ending on a more solemn note, activists in Syria say more than 76,000 people were killed in the country's civil war last year alone. Human rights groups are marking it as the deadliest 12 months since this violence began in 2011. Paul, are there any signs of the situation improving moving forward?
Well, despite widespread calls for assistance and other aid to address the growing humanitarian crisis there, the death toll is expected to rise through 2015. This as strikes by Islamic State militants and sectarian violence in Iraq show little sign of easing. Our Connie Kim has more.
2014 was the deadliest year in the 4-year-long Syrian civil war. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says more than 76,000 people were killed in the nation last year. And more than 17,000 of that total were civilians, including 3,500 children. The civil war, which started as an uprising against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, has now become a multi-front conflict, one that opened the door for the rise of the Islamic State militant group. The loss of life, however, isn't expected to decline anytime soon. 17 U.S.-led airstrikes were carried out on Thursday on IS-controlled buildings in the Syrian cities of Raqqa and Kobani. And marking the new year, Syrian President Assad made a rare visit to the front lines of the war in Jobar, east of Damascus. He visited government troops there to encourage them in their fight. Jobar is a former rebel stronghold, and the Syrian government has been trying to oust insurgents from the city in recent months. More than 200,000 people have been injured or killed since the Syrian conflict broke out in March 2011, and nearly half of the nation's population has been displaced. 3.2 million people have fled to the neighboring countries seeking asylum. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
All right, Paul, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for those stories, and we'll see you again on Primetime News, which is coming up in about 90 minutes' time.
Hello and happy Friday. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. We kicked off the day under brisk cold conditions nationwide, and snow fell along the west coast. However, at the moment, conditions have cleared up in most regions under mostly clear skies. If you are headed outdoors, make sure to gear up for the cold, as the wind chill factor is making it feel a lot colder than the actual numbers. Cold wave advisories have been issued for the northern regions, and this may lead to icy road conditions. Well, it looks like the cold snap that's that grip the nation will continue, and at the moment strong winds are blowing along the eastern coastline where air conditions remain very dry. Well, the cold snap will continue through tomorrow morning and will begin to ease up from tomorrow afternoon, and by Sunday the daytime high should peak at 8 degrees. On to tomorrow's readings. Seoul reaches 2, Daegu and Gwangju 5, Busan hits 8. On to other regions. Jeju makes it to 9, Dokdo hits 6, Mount Kumgang dips to -3. Those are the updates I have for you now. Hope you have a lovely Friday evening, and back to you, Teddy.
Thank you very much, Po Kyung, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.